Welcome to the 73rd Annual George Polk Awards in Journalism. I am Eric Krasnov, Chair of the Board of Trustees of Long Island University, and it is my privilege to honor with you today the efforts and achievements of journalists who uphold unwaveringly the highest principles of their craft. These awards have been given annually since 1949 in the name of CBS correspondent George Polk, who was murdered the prior year while covering the Greek Civil War. The enduring stature of the Polk Awards over its 7 decades is a testament to the outstanding journalists who have been honored, to our dedicated panel of judges, and to the growing national reputation of Long Island University. Now, similar to the journalists which this award celebrates, at its core, LIU's mission is to enable its students to appreciate and process information, to tell fact from fancy, and to develop a worldview grounded in reality and humanity. The work of journalism has become even more vital to maintaining democratic values and civil discourse during these times of twin perils, the viral pandemic and a pandemic of intolerance and autocracy throughout the world. So today, we honor the tenacity, dedication, and fearless pursuit of truth by journalists reporting on the COVID-19 pandemic, on the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and other essential stories that took courage and hard work to tell. We owe them a great debt. Thank you for making our world a better place. And now it is my honor to introduce Long Island University's transformative president, Dr. Kimberly Klein.
Thank you, Chairman Krasnov. The George Polk Awards is one of our nation's most coveted and respected honors in journalism, and it is one of my favorite events at Long Island University. For 73 years, the Polk Awards have paid tribute to courageous reporters, and it has never been more important than it is in this moment to report with truth and transparency. Building on George Polk's legacy, as well as the extraordinary reputation of decades of winners, Long Island University is committed to educating the next generation of journalists through the George Polk School of Communication. We will welcome our inaugural class this fall. Spearheaded by a faculty of award-winning journalists, scholars, and industry leaders, the Polk School will offer a rigorous curriculum in digital media, communications, print, and broadcast journalism. On behalf of the university, I would like to thank John Darton, Dr. Ralph Engelman, Charlene Hunter-Gault, our respected panel of judges, and of course, all of our prestigious winners. It is now my honor to introduce someone who needs no introduction, best-selling novelist, 2-time Polk Award winner, and curator of the Polk Awards, John Darton.
Thank you, Dr. Klein. Well, as you might imagine, this was a particularly busy year for the George Polk jury. We had a total of 592 submissions. A full 1/4 of them dealt with the COVID pandemic in all its various repercussions and manifestations. So we decided to increase the number of awards we'd give out this year. At this point, I would like to express our deep appreciation to the Nicholas B. Ottaway Foundation for its support. That allows us to give a money bonus to our winners, and we view it as essential to our mission. Now let's hear from the winners. I'll turn things over to our citation reader, Charlene Hunter-Gault. And I'd like to note at this point that this is a special year for her. It's the 60th anniversary of her integrating the University of Georgia. So congratulations, Charlene. And now, the first award is for foreign reporting.
When word reached Beijing about a viral outbreak, CNN correspondent David Culver didn't hesitate. He and his crew caught a train for the 650-mile trip to Wuhan. 24 hours later, as the city went into lockdown, they quickly left, sending out footage that gave the world its first on-the-scene look at the marketplace that was the crucible of the virus and the streets it stalked. From quarantine in a hotel room, they used their sources to document Chinese efforts to control the news, reaching the doctor on his deathbed who first spread the alarm. For their work, Culver, producer Young Chung, and photojournalist Natalie Thomas have won the George Polk Award for foreign reporting.
Hi there, I'm David Culver in Shanghai, receiving this award on behalf of CNN, and in particular, my colleagues, photojournalist Natalie Thomas and producer Yong Shong. If we go back more than a year ago to when we were leaving Wuhan, amidst the adrenaline rush, we had no idea how big this story would grow to be. What we did know is that we needed to stay on it. And I remember leaving and immediately going into something that not many people were talking about at the time, quarantine. Of course, now the world knows it many times over, but we had to begin based on what our CNN leadership and editors in Hong Kong and London and the US decided would be safest for our other colleagues here in China, and that is separation, the quarantine period of 14 days in which we continued to work our contacts, not only in Wuhan, but across China, to figure out what exactly led up to this outbreak, the allegations of cover-up, of mishandling, and more than anything else, how it might come to an end ultimately. Well, we know now it is still going on, and much of the world continuing to deal with it. However, our reporting, while it's being acknowledged here and recognized with the 2020 George Polk for Foreign Reporting Award, it continues on, and we are accepting it with a lot of gratitude. So thank you.
Over the course of 2020, the streets of many cities in America were sometimes silent and largely vacant under mandated lockdowns, and sometimes filled with protesters agitated by police killings and counter-protesters equally angry. One journalist, drawing upon his years of experience as a foreign correspondent in strife-torn countries, captured the tumult with vivid, on-the-scenes reporting. In 3 articles for The New Yorker, Luke Mogelson provided stunning insight into the racial justice uprising in Minneapolis, the anti-lockdown militias in Michigan, and the conflict between anti-fascist activists and the Proud Boys in Portland. For courageous, informative, and nuanced coverage, Luke Mogelson has won the George Polk Award for national reporting.
My name is Luke Mogelson. I'm very grateful for this recognition for a series of articles that I wrote for the New Yorker magazine in 2020. I really didn't know what to expect when I came to the US in early May, because I hadn't lived or worked there since 2010, and it was obviously a much different place than it had been when I left it. Throughout the course of my reporting on the various currents of social and political unrest in places like Michigan, Minneapolis, Portland, and ultimately Washington, D.C., I witnessed a lot of extremely ugly and demoralizing and alarming elements of our country. But along the way, I was also able to meet a lot of truly extraordinary fellow citizens who had committed themselves, often at great risk, to combating those elements. And so I just wanted to recognize them, because I wouldn't have been able to write any of these articles without their participation and generosity and inspiration. I also wouldn't have been able to write these articles without my editor, Daniel Zaleski, who not only enabled me to do the reporting and guided me along the way, but throughout my time at the New Yorker has made me a better writer just by virtue of his edits. There's also a team of fact checkers and copy editors who work on everything that appears in that magazine, and who are absolutely critical to everything that goes into the magazine, probably even more so for these particular pieces. So thank you to them, and thank you again for this honor.
More than 9 torturous minutes. That's how long Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin had his knee on the neck of George Floyd, whose killing became a global rallying cry among protesters who proclaimed Black Lives Matter. Beginning with its police reporter, Labor Janey, Reporters at the Minneapolis Star-Tribune produced noteworthy, comprehensive coverage. Their articles challenged the Minneapolis Police Department's initial account that Floyd died due to a medical issue while being arrested, and provided an exclusive look at the long-running culture that tolerated police misconduct from within the 3rd Precinct where Chauvin worked. For diligent reporting that elevated the public's understanding of the George Floyd case, the staff of the Minneapolis Star-Tribune has won the George Polk Award for local reporting.
My name is Labor Janey, and I am a public safety reporter for the Minneapolis Star-Tribune. I just wrapped up a holiday shift on Memorial Day, May 25th, and I was already home when I got a rather cryptic text about a press conference involving an in-custody police death. And so I ended up going to the newser, jotting notes, and was getting ready to sit down and write a story that we could get online when I started picking up on some rumblings online on Twitter and Facebook that there was more to this case than initially met the eye, or at least more than the cops told us at the news conference. And that's when I saw the video of George Floyd's death that was circulating on social media, and just started reporting from that point on. Wrote a story that got posted first thing in the morning, and from that point on, we sort of threw the full might of our newsroom behind it, because I think even then we had some sense, at least, of kind of the enormity of this event. I am very honored to have been part of this, or to be receiving this great honor, and I'm immensely proud of the work that we did as a newsroom, and not only covering the breaking news side of this story, but also producing enterprise pieces off of this that provided further context for our readers. But I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that you can feel conflicted about receiving an award like this that's based off of a story that has kind of brought so many people trauma and just has only furthered harm in certain communities. So we're definitely aware of that.
This virus is the great equalizer.
Early on in the pandemic, Governor Andrew Cuomo called COVID-19 the great equalizer. One news organization put the lie to this characterization. A team of reporters analyzed hard-to-get data on deaths by race, combining that with street reporting to prove that the virus had a disproportionate and devastating impact on Black Americans. At the same time, another colleague from the same organization predicted it would take a heavy toll on one particular industry. He and fellow reporter investigated meatpacking plants and showed that hundreds of low-paid, mostly immigrant workers toiling shoulder to shoulder in horrendous conditions were subject to ravaging outbreaks. For these important contributions to our understanding of the targeted sweep of the pandemic, the staff of ProPublica, and in particular Michael Grobel and Bernice Yeung, win the George Polk Award for health reporting.
Bernice Yeung and I are extremely grateful to the Polks. It's a bit overwhelming to win the award for health reporting when we're all going through one of the greatest health crises in more than a century, and when there's been so much good reporting done by others. We want to thank our editor Tracy Weber for always pushing us to dig deeper and to bring the intensity of the real world into our writing, and Steve Engelberg, Robin Field, and Dick Toffel for creating a newsroom where we could do this kind of work. This series of stories actually began in a chicken plant more than 3 years ago. I had been writing a story about how companies retaliate against immigrant workers, and I got to see the work environment firsthand. So when we started looking at how COVID might affect essential workers, my mind immediately jumped to the workers I'd seen standing shoulder to shoulder. And in March, I wrote a story asking, What happens if the nation's meat and poultry workers get sick? Unfortunately, soon after, outbreaks began hitting meatpacking plants across the country, ultimately infecting tens of thousands of workers and killing hundreds. To understand what was happening, Bernice and I, along with researchers Claire Perlman and Molly Simon, filed 180 public record requests. And what we found were public health officials struggling to protect their communities while at the mercy of big meat packers who refused to shut down and were late to implement safety measures. One of the most surprising moments came when Bernice began pulling documents showing the food industry had been warned for more than a decade about a pandemic. We originally assumed that the meatpacking industry had, like all of us, just been caught off guard, but that wasn't the case. They had been told to plan for social distancing, even if it affected the processing lines. They'd been told that 40% of their workers might be out sick and that could cause food shortages. They'd been told to stockpile masks. Meatpacking had once been a path to the middle class for hundreds of thousands of workers, including Black families from the South. In Waterloo, Iowa, packing house workers led the fight for civil rights. But when COVID hit, the industry had been transformed into one where workers often face mistreatment and dangerous conditions. We spoke to a lot of workers for this story. The names of the workers and their family members who died speak to America's diversity. Sadiqa Bojic, Felicie Joseph, Day Re, Jim Orvis, Riberiano Garcia, Axel Cabella. Many of them were immigrants and refugees, and they came for many of the same reasons, for the same reason that many of our families came, to seek a better life. And so we hope more than anything that this award will lend recognition to them and honor their lives. Thank you.
On behalf of myself and the team, Nina Martin, Lizzie Presser, Annie Waldman, Dua Eldib, Talia Buford, Adriana Gallardo, Tony Briscoe, and Josh Kaplan, I want to say thank you. Thank you to the George Polk Awards for honoring our work, but most importantly, thank you to the people who shared their stories with us. Some while the losses were incredibly fresh, some amid busy days and nights on the front lines of the pandemic. You know, early in the pandemic, ProPublica decided that it was going to assemble a team to cover what we knew would be the disproportionate and devastating impact on Black Americans. All too often, public health crises are. But we never could have imagined the depth of the devastation. Milwaukee County, one of the few agencies at the beginning that broke out data on deaths by race, not even the CDC was doing so publicly at the time, gave the earliest look at an emerging pattern that would become a profound toll. The stories that followed attempted to make sense of this disparity, to understand why Black Americans are so vulnerable to this virus. In Chicago, we set out to speak to the families of the first 100 people who died. 70 were Black. In New Orleans, we gave voice to families who were forced to care for dying loved ones because a hospital decided to discharge patients who were terminally ill with the coronavirus. We dug into disparities in diabetic amputations and kidney transplantations and illuminated the ways that racism and chronic health conditions are linked. We honored Black lives. And we thank you for honoring our work.
The best beat reporters develop sources who aid them in bringing insights, breaking news, and scoops to their readers and listeners. When the pandemic hit, Dan Diamond of Politico was ready to go. 15 years of source building gave him the edge in breaking story after story that held the Trump administration accountable for interfering with long-standing health agencies. Most importantly, he showed that the essential CDC bulletins were being slanted to conform to the administration's line of wishful thinking. Congressional inquiries were sparked, misuse of funds was revealed, and the federal government's general mismanagement of COVID-19 was laid bare. For his work, shining a light on why we remain in the grip of this deadly virus, Dan Diamond is given the George Polk Award for medical reporting.
This is Dan Diamond, and it feels odd to celebrate anything after a year when so much happiness was muted and so many lives were affected. My own year was defined by the pandemic, writing more than 150 articles and newsletters focused on coronavirus and the Trump administration's response. Starting on January 8th, 2020, when I first reached out to health officials about a mysterious virus spreading in China. It's hard to zero in on a single story among so many, but there were moments that stand out. Like in February, when we reported, before a single recorded US death from the virus, that testing failures and leadership chaos meant it was already too late to stop the pandemic. Or in March, when Hallie Toozy and I tried to make sense of this stack of papers that turned out to be the Obama administration's pandemic playbook, which the Trump team had ignored. And I'll always remember the shock in September when I first learned that political appointees were trying to change the CDC's scientific reports to align with President Trump. It was a year when being on the health beat meant chasing the biggest story on the planet every day. Politico taught me that accountability journalism can spring from beat reporting, that Congress can open investigations, that officials can be reassigned or fired, that journalism can help protect people. The editor who shaped so much of that coverage was Peter Canellos, whose vision, generosity, and wordsmithing has helped change my career. An award like this is also only possible because Politico's newsroom has been led by Carrie Budoff-Brown, who instilled that accountability focus and filled the newsroom with colleagues like Adam Cankren, Sarah Overmall on the health team, Nancy Cook and Daniel Littman on the White House team, Joanne Kennan, Adriel Bettelheim, Jason Millman as editors, and I also have to thank the sources who took courageous risks to speak with me and help shed light on these issues. Thank you so much to the Polk Awards Committee for putting my work among so many reporters, publications that I admire, investigations that I remember reading in the San Francisco Chronicle, in the New York Times, and the Star Trib, and magazines like The Atlantic and The New Yorker, and The Washington Post, which I now work. I subscribe to all of those publications. You can never subscribe to too many news outlets is my motto. Finally, I hope to build on this work and to continue to hold officials accountable as we enter the second year of the outbreak. And I hope one day, when this pandemic is over, to do journalism that's again worthy of Polk consideration. So I get to thank you in person.
During the year that the coronavirus convulsed the world, there was one journalist whose clear and comprehensive analyses were essential reading for anyone wanting to make sense of the nightmare. The Atlantic's Ed Young suspected as far back as 2018 that a pandemic was coming and warned that America wasn't ready. When his prediction came truer than anyone could have imagined, he turned into a virtual national explainer-in-chief. His first piece, How the Pandemic Will End, examined with sweep and grace the scope of the crisis and the consequences yet to come. Early on, he identified the special problems faced by long haulers, and in the fall, with the election imminent, How the Pandemic Defeated America laid out a definitive account of why America's record of containment and prevention was among the worst in the world. For his masterful and indispensable analysis of the factors behind the spread of the pandemic, Ed Young has won the George Polk Award for Science Reporting.
Well, thank you very much for this incredible honor. It feels truly remarkable to have won an award for science reporting in a year when science reporting was so pivotal to all of our lives. I think the COVID-19 pandemic has been a singular story, the story of the year, of the decade, perhaps for some of our lifetimes. And I think science reporting, when done well, has all the attributes that are needed to help people make sense of a pivotal moment like this. We are trained to run towards uncertainty, to embrace nuance, to make sense of incredibly complicated information and to make that seem simple and accessible to people without a technical background. We are trained to be critical, to be skeptical, and to look broader at context and history and the future. I hope I've done all of that. I hope that in the work that I produced last year, I gave people a stable platform from which to observe the torrential flow of information and misinformation around them and make sense of what was a truly historic crisis. I couldn't have done that work without support from The Atlantic, who gave me the opportunity, the mandate, the time and the space to do the kind of journalism that I think made a difference to the lives of our readers. To my editors, to the entire publication, to all of my colleagues who set the standard for COVID reporting so very high, I offer my most heartfelt thanks. And thanks to the judges and all the folks at the Polk Awards for this incredible honor. It means the absolute world.
The SARS outbreak, the bird flu, the H1N1 flu pandemic, Ebola, Zika. With 15 years of experience of covering health threats like these, Helen Branswell of the health-oriented news website STAT brought deep knowledge of infectious diseases and strong relationships with trusted experts to her reporting on the novel coronavirus. Branswell became one of the most credible sources of up-to-date information. She was a persistent watchdog who pressed government officials and public health authorities for answers. She helped fuel a national debate over CDC's role when she challenged the CDC's director's claim that his agency was deeply involved in the response to the crisis. "But you're invisible now, sir," she told him. "Your agency is invisible." For speaking truth to power and providing authoritative reports during the crisis, we honor Helen Branswell of STAT with the George Polk Award for Public Service.
My name is Helen Branswell, and I cover infectious diseases and global health for STAT. I want to start by thanking the judges of this year's George Polk Awards for this extraordinary honor. The award recognizes my coverage of the COVID-19 pandemic. I came to this story with experience covering a coronavirus outbreak. In 2003, I was a health reporter living in Toronto when that city became the only place outside of Asia to have a full-fledged outbreak of SARS. One of the important lessons I learned from that experience was that a new disease has the potential to cause incredible damage if it's allowed to establish itself. So when I saw an alert about 4 unexplained pneumonia cases in China on New Year's Eve 2019, I knew this could be a problem. China had honed its surveillance system for detecting new emerging diseases since the SARS outbreak. If they weren't able to figure out what was causing the pneumonia cases, I knew there was a decent chance it was a new virus. I started reaching out to contacts in Asia and elsewhere looking for information. On January 4th, 2020, STAT published my first piece on what was happening in Wuhan. In that article, I reported that the cause might be a new coronavirus. At that point, the case count had jumped from 4 to 44, and it was clear China was having difficulty controlling the situation. By January 5th, I was talking with a regular source about whether this was going to be a pandemic. In the nearly 14 months since, I've written almost exclusively about COVID-19. My work is being honored here, but in truth, so many people contribute day in and day out to STAT's coverage of this pandemic, starting with my superb editor, Jason Ukeman. I would also like to thank STAT's executive editor, Rick Burke, who announced before COVID even had a name that all of our pandemic coverage was going to be in front of STAT's paywall. And I'd like to thank 2 colleagues in particular, Drew Joseph and the late, incomparable Sharon Begley. Thank you very much.
How to capture the suffering, stoicism, guilt, nobility, and other sorrows visited by the scourge with the antiseptic name COVID-19. Eli Saslow, a reporter who inhabits the hollows and plains of everyday America, struck upon a uniquely powerful way. Let them tell it in their own words. He conducted intense interviews yielding 20,000 words each with carefully chosen subjects. Each captured a different, deeply human story. A widower who didn't get a chance to say goodbye. A store owner who fills the bag of a shoplifter. a long hauler who could no longer tell the date or count out money, a stricken nursing home aide who in a moment of panic hugged her mother, who then got the disease and died. For Voices from the Pandemic, 25 first-person stories representing a new form of narrative journalism, Eli Zaslow of the Washington Post has won the first ever George Polk Award for oral history.
Hey guys, this is Eli Zaslow from the Washington Post. I'm hugely grateful to win the Polk Award. It is such a meaningful award to me. I look at the winners every year and draw such inspiration from that list. So I'm grateful to be among them, although I'm sorry that we're not all together. Mostly I'd just like to thank the Post, the Washington Post, for always believing in my work, and especially my editor, David Finkel, who is such a partner in every story that I do in terms of searching out ideas and making them better throughout the reporting process. But most of all, really, this work is a credit to the people who took huge amounts of time out of their lives during massively difficult moments in this difficult year to talk to me, and to talk to me with intimacy and with honesty about their lives, sometimes about moments that are vulnerable or embarrassing, and who trusted me to share those stories, and then who trusted readers to read them with empathy when possible, and also with humanity. And for me, these conversations in a year that was otherwise difficult, frustrating, marked by systemic and political failures, the sort of courage and honesty of the phone calls with these people featured in these oral histories, they were what sustained me. So mostly I'm grateful to them. Thanks so much for reading and for honoring the work.
In what was called the most important election of our lifetime, all eyes ultimately turned to Georgia. What was at stake was captured by one reporter who wrote deeply developed character-driven stories. How the campaign of one longtime sheriff became a referendum on law enforcement in the year of Black Lives Matter. Why suburban women were questioning the worlds they inherited and the implications of that rebellion at the polls. The anger and mistrust that catapulted a QAnon-inspired candidate, Marjorie Taylor Greene, all the way to the House of Representatives. For her excellent reporting on the unseen winds behind political change, Stephanie McCrummen of the Washington Post receives the George Polk Award for political reporting.
This is Stephanie McCrummen, and I'm a national enterprise reporter for the Washington Post, and it is thrilling to be getting an award for political reporting for these stories that are not conventional political stories in the sense that they're not about the presidential campaign exactly. They weren't about polls or political strategy. These were 3 stories, each of them set pretty much in a small town in Georgia, and each of them about an ordinary person trying to figure out how to be at this moment in America. One of them was about a suburban woman outside of Augusta who was in the process of questioning all the values that she had grown up believing and what that meant for her relationships. Another story was about the long-serving white sheriff of a county in southern Georgia who was facing re-election and whose opponent was an African-American man who was trying to figure out if this might be the time when an African-American could actually be elected to sheriff in such a place. And the third story was maybe the most conventional in the sense that it was about a political campaign, a congressional campaign in Georgia's 14th district. This is where Marjorie Taylor Greene was running, but the story was focused on her opponent, her Democratic opponent, who was an ordinary person who had never run for office before and who was trying to figure out how to run against a conspiracy theory at a time when politics obviously had just become such a vicious proposition. It's really thrilling to be recognized for political reporting for these stories. Thank you so much to the Polk Award. Thank you to my editor, David Finkel, for making every story better than I thought it could be. Thank you to Stephen Ginsburg for giving me and us on the National Enterprise team the room to pursue these stories that aren't always obvious And thank you to Marty Barron for creating a newsroom where these kind of stories are not just possible, but they are encouraged and supported. Thanks so much.
For years, Facebook deflected criticism that a profits-first approach undermined democracy, condoned fraud, and could even promote violence. Where was the proof? Enter Ryan Mack and Craig Silverman of BuzzFeed. Using inside sources and persuasive data, they demonstrated in a series of stories that Facebook routinely disregarded pleas of employees as well as customers about dangerous or destructive content. In one instance, ignoring 455 complaints about sponsors urging attendees to bring weapons to an event where 2 people were shot to death. For exposing the seamy underside of a social media giant, Mack and Silverman are honored for business reporting.
Hi, I'm Craig Silverman from BuzzFeed News, and on behalf of our entire newsroom, I want to thank the Polk Awards for this incredible recognition. We're truly grateful for it. This series of stories about Facebook took months and months of developing sources inside the company and also investigating activity on the platform, and we're truly grateful that the Polk Awards have decided to recognize it.
And I'm Ryan Mack with BuzzFeed News. I'd like to reiterate what Craig said. This was a true team effort from our editors, John and Matt, to our editor-in-chief, Mark Schoofs, art, curation, copy, everyone that helped get these stories over the line. It was a true privilege to work with everyone on these. I'd like to also thank our sources as well, people that stepped up inside the company to talk to us and show us some of these things and help us expose essentially one of the most powerful companies in the world right now. So it's been a privilege, and thank you so much.
It'll all be revealed. It's going to come out. But after the auditors...
$750. That's the amount of federal income taxes Donald J. Trump paid in 2016, the year he won the presidency. It's also the same amount he paid his first year in office. In 11 of the 18 years between 2000 and 2017, Trump paid no federal income taxes whatsoever. For exposing how Trump benefited from a host of legally dubious tax write-offs, such as $70,000 for hair care and almost $800,000 in consulting fees paid to his daughter, and for revealing his penchant for reporting losing more money than he made, New York Times reporter Russ Buettner, Suzanne Craig, and Mike McIntyre achieved a reportorial coup that won them the George Polk Award for financial reporting.
Hi, this is Sue Craig. I'm a reporter at the New York Times. Donald Trump for years vowed that if he ever ran for president, he would release his tax returns. Of course, he didn't. And his refusal to do so launched a seemingly impossible search for these documents by a small group of reporters at the New York Times. We scoured decades of paper records in courthouses. We reached out to his accountants, friends, and even close relatives. Along the way, we had a lot of great stuff, including old tax returns and a lot of information about Fred Trump and his wealth, but his modern tax returns for years remained elusive. And the Times told us to keep digging, and we did. And eventually we hit pay dirt. And the tax team obtained Donald Trump's tax return information, personal and corporate, for the last 2 decades. Myself, Russ Buettner, Mike McIntyre, along with editors Matt Purdy and Paul Fischletter, and Gabe Dance and Keith Collins, 2 people who are incredibly gifted at visual storytelling. We worked round the clock for months, analyzing the data and shaping what became a series of stories that ran in the fall of 2020. We found a lot of stuff. A president whose businesses lose so much money that he has paid virtually no income tax in 2 decades and more. And his finances are under incredible stress. He's facing an IRS audit that, if it goes against him, could cost him $100 million or more. And at the same time that we were doing this, there was another group of reporters at the paper. They were looking at another aspect of Mr. Trump's life, and that is his properties, his golf courses, his clubs, and how those are being used by people to curry favor with the Trump administration. The truth is often hard to find, and Donald Trump's taxes may well have remained hidden forever if not for the incredibly brave sources who put their trust in us and the New York Times, and we owe them all a debt of gratitude. And the second ingredient that made this project a success was the unflinching support of the New York Times and its executive editor, Dean Baquet, as well as the Salzburger family. So on behalf of every reporter who worked on this project, I just want to convey how truly honored we are to have our work judged worthy of a George Polk Award.
The 1862 Act that allowed for the funding of land-grant colleges has long had a dark side, known but rarely examined. High Country News, a Colorado-based magazine, assisted by the Fund for Investigative Journalism and the Pulitzer Center for Crisis Reporting, filled in an historical lacuna with a 2-year project that quantified tract by tract the forced sale and outright theft of land belonging to indigenous peoples. The dimensions were astonishing. 11 million acres with a value today of $500 million taken from 250 tribal nations to establish 52 institutions of higher learning. For research that is shaking the consciences of colleges coast to coast, Robert Lee and Tristan Aton, with an assist from Colleen Goodlock, have won the George Polk Education Reporting Award.
Hi, I'm Tristan Otto.
And I'm Robert Lee.
Thank you for this honor. It's a particularly special award for us because this is a story that came together entirely by chance.
Land grab universities began in 2018 when Tristan and I were on fellowships at the same university, which was fortunate because I'm a historian and he's a journalist, and we otherwise wouldn't be running in the same circles. I gave a talk on my preliminary research on the indigenous origins of land-grant university endowments. At the time, I'd figured out enough to know how large the story was, how complicated it would be to unravel, and how urgent it was to get out into the world. So I ended my talk with a plea for collaboration, and it just so happened that Tristan was there in the audience. We got to talking afterwards about how to develop an investigative report for High Country News, and 2 years later, the Land Grab University's report and website came out.
As well, when we published, we were worried about the story being overwhelmed by the pandemic, as the only story being told in every news outlet in the world at that time was entirely about COVID-19. We were relieved to know that after a while, though, the story was widely being read, discussed, reported, and acted on by students and faculty around the country.
And we hope to see more responses in the future. We're grateful to have the story be honored with a Polk Award.
Ian Shapiro of the Washington Post aimed his laser-like reporting skills at discrimination at the Virginia Military Institute, the country's oldest state-supported military college. He found an institution rooted in a segregationist Confederate history that persevered into daily life today. Students of color were subjected to disproportionate discipline and what they described as relentless racism. A black student was threatened with hanging. A white teacher shared her fond recollection of parties thrown by the Ku Klux Klan. For his work, which led to the resignation of the school superintendent, his replacement by a black graduate, and a sweeping state investigation, Ian Shapiro has won the George Polk Award for state reporting.
Hi, my name is Ian Shapiro, and I'm a local enterprise reporter for the Washington Post. I want to give my deepest thanks to Long Island University for honoring our stories about systemic racism at the Virginia Military Institute, the nation's oldest state-supported military college. VMI was founded in 1839 in Lexington, Virginia. Its students fought and died for the South in the Civil War. It was the last college in Virginia to racially integrate. For years, buildings and other memorials on campus have honored Confederate officers and slaveholders. One statue always stuck out, the statue of Confederate General Stonewall Jackson. It stood right in the center of campus. For years, students had to salute it, and for years, minority and white students complained. After I wrote one article about an alumni campaign to get rid of the statue, my editor Linda Robinson and I realized that the far greater story was about the campus's systemic racism. The accounts I heard were startling. A black woman had to sit in the middle of a business class in the year 2019 while her white professor reminisced about her father's KKK membership. A black student during Freshman Hell Week in the year 2018 was threatened by a white student with a lynching. Black students, I also learned, have also been routinely denigrated on an anonymous social media app that's very popular among the student body. Then there was the honor code system. VMI turned down my request for the numbers, but I was able to obtain from sources data showing that its one strike and you're out honor court expels Black and minority students at a disproportionately high rate. After my stories ran, the state launched an investigation into the school, its first Black leader was appointed, the honor system is now under possible reform, and that Stonewall Jackson statue was finally removed. Thank you again. I am deeply honored for the George Polk Award for state reporting.
As the outrage over George Floyd's killing ignited protests all across the country, the Washington Post delved deeply into the man himself. Who was he? What was his life like? And how did he end up at this particular inflection point in the long, consequential history of white policemen targeting African Americans for harassment and brutality? The result was a 6-part series based upon 150 interviews. It portrayed George Floyd as a friendly child, an ambitious youngster, a school dropout, a prisoner, and finally, a man determinedly looking to start over, but dogged by 20 police stops. For a series that went beyond the role racism played in his death to show how it shaped his entire life, the Washington Post has won the George Polk Justice Reporting Award.
The George Floyd's America series is the only place where you could read not just about George Floyd's death, but about his life. We had reporters who went deep into his childhood in Houston, where he grew up in the CUNY Homes housing project, looked at Jack Yates High School, where he matriculated. And all of this reporting told the story not just of his experience, but the ways in which his life intersected with systemic racism in America. The story both went deep on his life and biography, but also took a look at the institutions that his life intersected with, took a look at some of the policies, criminal justice policies, education policies that impacted his life chances and experiences, and help us understand how we got to the place that we are. And it became a revealing portrait that I think is going to continue to inform the conversation about race in America.
As we now know, COVID-19 killed an inordinately high number of elderly people in nursing homes. But no story captured the pandemic laid waste to the often ill-prepared and understaffed facilities as powerfully as Katie Englehart's What Happened in Room 10. In the California Sunday magazine, the piece is anchored around 2 patients who shared a room at the Life Care Center in Kirkland, Washington, the country's first known hotspot. In a harrowing narrative, she captures the panic, suffering, and chaos of 2 elderly women facing death, one racked by dementia, the other fully cognizant. She also depicts the profit-driven medical decisions that resulted in the deaths of 46 patients and staff members there, and tens of thousands more in the industry at large. For a rigorous and authentic account of what went wrong and why, Katie Engelhardt has won the George Polk Award for magazine reporting.
Hello, my name is Katie Engelhardt, and it is my enormous honor to accept this year's George Polk Award for magazine reporting for my California Sunday article, What Happened in Room 10. When I began work on this piece, I had a very simple goal. It was to understand what it felt like to be inside a nursing home as the coronavirus moved through its hallways. And it was to understand at as specific a level as I could what it really felt like to be confined for days to a room, to a bed, without information, without family members, without clean clothes or a shower or fresh hearing aid batteries. This impulse led into a months-long investigation looking at pandemic response errors at the state, county, and federal levels, and then into an even broader investigation into the rise of the American nursing home, and more specifically, the for-profit nursing home. I am very grateful to my editors, Kit Ratchless and Doug McCrae, to the award committee, and especially to the residents of the Life Care Center of Kirkland, Washington, who allowed me to share their stories. Thank you.
At sea, the nuclear aircraft carrier USS Theodore Roosevelt was uniquely susceptible to the coronavirus. Its crew of nearly 5,000 living in tightly packed quarters began succumbing to the disease. So when the ship docked in Guam, its commanding officer, Captain Brett Crozier, emailed Navy higher-ups requesting that the sailors be allowed to quarantine on shore. The San Francisco Chronicle got hold of the letter, which forced a partial evacuation, led to the captain's dismissal, and caused a national furor. The paper stayed ahead on many of the twists and turns of the story, including the Navy's missteps and reversals. By the end, more than 1,000 men and women fell ill, including one who died. And the acting Secretary of the Navy, who had relieved the captain of his command, himself resigned. For their dogged reporting, Matthias Gaffney, Joe Garofoli, and Tal Coppin are awarded the George Polk Award for military reporting.
Hi, I'm Matthias Gaffney. I'm a reporter with the San Francisco Chronicle. On behalf of my colleagues, Joe Garofoli and Tal Coppin, we'd like to thank you for this tremendous honor. It was about a year ago when the pandemic shut down the world and shut our newsroom down. And we got a tip shortly thereafter about a wayward nuclear aircraft carrier that got stuck in Guam and had a massive COVID outbreak among its sailors. We obtained a letter from the captain to his Navy supervisors asking for help, pleading for help, and we reported on it, and it very quickly became an international story. It was an incredible challenge reporting on this story, just from being at home and away from our colleagues, our team, to trying to pierce the Navy's and the military's thick bureaucracy to tell a story that was unfolding before us. Rather than waiting for the Navy report to come out, we were trying to tell this unfolding tragedy in real time. And through our reporting, we saw a lot of changes. Captain Brett Crozier lost his command. The acting Navy secretary wound up resigning. It was incredibly, every day was something new was happening, and it was a big challenge to report from 18-hour time difference in Guam and 6,000 mile difference in Guam to trying to obtain documents from the Navy to tell Captain Brett Crozier's side of the story. We received a lot of feedback from the public, and none of it was positive. We were told we were traitors. We were told we should be prosecuted. But we also received letters from some of the family and sailors thanking us for our reporting. And I'd be remiss without thanking our newsroom, all the people who helped with our reporting and this coverage, from photographers to editors to digital mavens to producers. Thank you all for your help on this. You also deserve this award. Thank you very much.
When Breonna Taylor, a 26-year-old EMT, was shot and killed by police in a disastrous raid on her home in Louisville, Kentucky on March 13, 2020, her death was not the national news story it would soon become. It took the killing of George Floyd 2 months later for her name to penetrate the national consciousness on race. Another addition to the shameful roster of Black Americans cut down by law enforcement officers. Their killings and others ignited a global protest movement. The reporting of Roberto Ferdman and his Vice News Tonight crew played a critical role in bringing her death to a public reckoning. They secured photos, videos, and other material that had been hidden by the authorities, interviewed witnesses, unearthed footage at the time of the raid, documented past problems of police practices, analyzed the dangers to civilians of no-knock raids, and recorded the anguish of her family and the frustration of the African American community. For reporting that exposed Taylor's senseless shooting and the system that allowed it to happen, the George Polk Award for television reporting goes to Roberto Ferdman, and Vice News Tonight.
The first thing I'd like to say is that I'm accepting this award on behalf of an entire team that I was privileged to work with on this investigation. That includes Juanita Ceballos, Nicole Bezorgmir, Belle Cushing, Ani Ukar, Ben Bishop, Jeb Benegas, Drew Pattison, Zach Caldwell, Nick Krause, Carissa Henderson, Bernardo Garcia, and Maral Yousefi, and that it is an honor for all of us to have simply had our work considered, let alone chosen. And the second thing that I'd like to say is that no investigative reporting happens without a chorus of essential sources. And we had and still have so many brave ones in Louisville who risked their livelihood to help us and help us tell this story. And this work is theirs too. So thank you so much on behalf of all of us. It's truly an honor.
Regina Martinez was only 5 feet tall and 100 pounds, but the 48-year-old journalist for the investigative weekly Proceso was a powerhouse in Veracruz, especially when she was onto a big story. She refused bribes. She was not deterred by threats. Nothing could stop her. Nothing, that is, except murder. As the Washington Post's Dana Priest described the scene, an intruder broke into her modest cinder block home from her garden patio. He probably caught her in the bathroom. She fought back. With brass knuckles, he broke her jaw. Then he strung a rag around her neck and squeezed it until she suffocated to death. The story she was investigating might have died with her in 2012. But Forbidden Stories, a Paris-based global network of investigative reporters that continues the work of journalists silenced by homicide, stepped in to complete much of her work. 60 reporters across 18 countries produced The Cartel Project, a 5-part series documenting the violence, political connections, and worldwide reach of Mexican drug cartels. The special award is given posthumously to Regina Martinez for her courage and perseverance, and to Forbidden Stories for resurrecting her work and shining a light on one of the 119 journalists slain in Mexico over the past 2 decades.
It's an honor, and it is also painful, to render thanks for this special recognition by the George Polk Awards in the name of Regina Martinez, my fellow journalist at Proceso in Veracruz. Her murder in 2012 heightened the fear among journalists in that state and showed the world the grave, dangerous conditions under which journalism is practiced in Mexico, back then and still today. Many other journalists throughout the country have been murdered in the last 2 decades. This award inspires us to continue pushing for justice, not just for Regina, but also for each of them and their families. Those of us who knew Regina, her colleagues at Proceso, her friends, and her colleagues in Veracruz, know that her work is more than deserving of this award. And we hail the initiative by Forbidden Stories and the effort of each of the journalists with whom we collaborated on the Cartel Project in memory of her life and her reporting. With the support of Forbidden Stories and the Cartel Project International Journalist Coalition, we asked Mexico President Andrés Manuel López Obrador in November to reopen the investigation into Regina's murder and to clarify what happened. The president gave his word about doing so, and we continue to expect it to come to fruition.
That's it for the George Polk Awards for 2020. Thank you for watching.